Hi everyone, welcome to a Wolfram language design review, part of our language completeness and consistency series, and we seem to have a variety of topics today. Um, Boy, when are we going to tackle the really tough ones? Like,
Well, I don't know what you mean by the really tough ones, but
well, the chestnuts that have been kind of encrusting themselves for more than 3 decades, like, uh, you know, symbol names like capital E and so on.
that's in the not too distant future, but
Okay, good.
those are sort of more immediately pressing.
Okay, that's fine. But just let's make sure we get to those. We don't put those off because I think we have the wherewithal to actually finally roast that chestnut. Is that what one does to really old chestnuts? I don't know. Um, okay. Cyclic list and cyclic array. What does this all mean? So this has to do with, so do we have an
Right.
example here?
So last time we talked about well, maybe it was two times ago. We talked about, cyclic, um, and as sort of this thing that you can take as many parts of it as you want. Um,
Right. Like
and
that. I mean, is that what you mean?
That's presumably should be parts brackets, double brackets around seven,
Well,
right?
that's what I was wondering.
right. So, and in fact, um, right. Sort of what the front end needs is something, you know, completely inert, right?
Yep.
That just sort of sits there. And in fact, overriding part for that thing would not be useful. In fact, it would be anti-useful for the front end
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah. Right.
for
I mean, I'm
um
nervous about overriding part. The concept of a cyclic object that you can index into like this seems less problematic. The the fact that I mean I hate to think that path and extract might behave differently or whatever, and but part is such a low level operation that it makes me very nervous. I mean, where have we overridden part? We've overridden it for things like sparse array, right?
right. Um so and that, sort of if we were to override part like we do, right, I mean, right, there are several different sort of things one might mean by a cyclic list or cyclic array, as sort of a, Jose likes to point out, well, you might mean something that's of finite size, but you only store a fundamental period. So, instead of
I see.
saving, you know, a million by a million, you save, 5 by 5. And, that's something that, that sort of cyclic array, you could imagine, uh what's that supposed to mean?
It means there are bounds from -10 to 20. And if you're outside of that region, it's an error.
I see. Um,
Because that's the only difference between, being within the bounds or outside the bounds is it, well, I mean, length could work on a cyclic list, I guess, with bounds or dimensions could at least work on it, right?
yes and no, right? Um,
Well, cyclic
so
array dimensions, look, in this case, I think cyclic array makes more sense, by the way, than cyclic list, but because I can imagine the two-dimensional case being interesting as well.
right.
Um, but I mean, in that case, I can imagine that this is array-like syntax, maybe. I don't really know, but I mean, let's say, that's representing, and then if I say dimensions of that, the answer would be, 30, 100, or 101, or whatever it is. And if I didn't have these in here, dimensions would be infinity, or possibly an error.
Right.
I mean, I actually prefer the concept of cyclic array because I think it's more analogous to sparse array and other kinds of structured arrays, which are, you know, um, uh, which are kind of sort of array-like things that override part.
Right.
Sandra on our live stream is asking what would happen if you assigned this to something. I don't think a null value is very promising here.
So, 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 so I think the right concept here is the cyclic array indeed, but with dimensions, with normal dimensions as our arrays typically do. And then this could be implemented in the structure array framework, and it would be relatively easy to do there. Now, I think the key discussion here that Itai is presenting is that we probably have two different projects: the inert cyclic objects that the front end needs, and the cyclic array project as a computational object via a structure
Jose,
array.
if you've got to be able to index into it with index -17 and things.
In cyclic, but in cyclic array, I mean, we don't do it for.
Well, I don't know
I
that
know,
you
but
could,
it's
no, I don't think you
important
should be able to index into with -17 into cyclic, at least not in the one argument form.
Well,
right.
let me just point out that in uses that I would have of this,
Mm-hmm.
you are constantly, I mean, even, look, a very trivial case is imagine you like a cellular automaton or something. You've got it on a domain that is wrapped around. Okay. So what you
Okay.
want to do is you want to say something like, element blah 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 -1 function of element, I don't know, we might say, I -1, let's just say -1, okay. So and by the way, this is another reason why I don't think the part thing is a good idea. I mean, it's this, I might end up wanting to sample those values and wanting to get the things from, the cycle, if you get what I'm saying.
But if this is going to be an array that we can normalize with normal, then -1 should follow our
I
conventions
don't
of
think
being
we
the last
should be
element.
able to normalize it. I don't think we should. Why? You're right. That's a different thing, which I don't know how useful it is. I mean, I have to say that's not something I've needed. I mean,
Well,
if I need an array that is cyclic, I'll just make it cyclic. I mean, it may be that there's a structured array setting that we should define that is a
Right, but I think the point is, I think there are 2 points. One is, any sort of array-like thing, true array-like thing, is going to evaluate non-trivially, and that is not what the front end needs. Now, I have if right, one of the things I suggest is if we need indexing even for the basic cyclic object, then that should be sub-values, not part. And then if you want to allow 0, I mean, I don't know what 0 and negative values mean, right? Because if all you have is the fundamental period there, like 1 is kind of obvious, but I don't know what 0 and -1 are. Is 0 mean something different than what it means in
to the
part?
left of, no, it means, look, the problem is that you want to do kind of mathematical indexing, if you get what I'm saying, on an array. Look, imagine that I
Right,
have an array.
and that's why I'm saying that that should be just cyclic. Well, I don't think that's an array. I think it's a list.
Yeah, it's a list. But
It's
I
a
don't know.
list, and I think we should do that via sub values, not via part.
Oh, I agree with you. I think the part is a losing proposition,
Okay.
right? I think the part is just inviting people to try things that couldn't possibly work.
The
Mhm.
big question is what is 0? Because if you want to support negative indices and have those like parts would be, then 0 doesn't work.
No, we don't. We're not going to be able to do that. This is mathematical indexing, not our kind of computational
Okay,
indexing.
fine.
Right.
Then-
So
Yeah. So then, right. So
it really means take the mod, you take that
Yeah.
thing, mod whatever, mod n, comma 1. every index is fed through mod and this basically.
Mhm.
Yep.
But accepting 0.
No,
What's wrong with 0?
including
Then?
0.
0 is fine. 0 is fine because 0 mod n,
Mhm.
it's just
So-
that.
So 0 becomes the last element of the block.
Exactly.
Mhm. Right.
Yep. And I mean, something we haven't needed in 40 years is zero origin indexed lists. We
Well,
could imagine.
the second argument of array, in a sense, handles a bit of that.
Kind of does, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, I've never wanted this. We could imagine a zero origin list where, that we could index into like this, but I've never wanted it. I don't think anybody else has, so let's not worry about it. But I think what we need here, okay, so my speculation would be that, let's say we had a cyclic array concept, maybe it should be called cyclic list, I'm not sure, where there is no normal form of it. I mean, it doesn't have to have a normal form, or there's no normal form of the cyclic array unless you give a second argument. If you do give a second argument, okay, there's a couple of things I can imagine happening. So let's try this. So let's say -5 to 2, let's say. One possible thing this could turn into is an association as its canonical form, whatever it is. Just saying. I mean, the other possible form is that it ignores the indices and just has the one index being the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that would fit within the whole framework we have for these structured arrays is having, as Jose said, having, instead of, ranges, just having dimension. But then that would change the zero. I mean,
It's
part,
not
but it
what's
would
going to be
change the
useful.
zero case.
Look, it will be lovely to fit it into that framework, but I think there might be a different construct that is a purely, as a structured array that happens to be cyclic, although I don't think that's so useful. I think the useful case is the case where you don't have to worry, where you don't have to put these mods in all over the place. See what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, I mean, right, the point of what Jose and Rob are saying is that you don't need to put the mods in all over the place in this thing either, right? It's just right. I mean, it is an optimization, right? But it's a useful optimization, right? Sometimes you have very large things which are mostly which are basically repeating, and it's nice to be able
Yeah,
to.
but that's solving a different problem from the problem I'm trying to solve, which is the everyday
Right. The
programming
problem you're
problem.
trying to solve is not cyclic array. It's cyclic list, or what we've implemented as cyclic based on
Well,
the last
could we have
discussion.
could we have a mixture in which cyclic array responds via structure array to normal as a normal array, but via subvalues to what Stephen wants?
Possible. By the way, is there an implementation? Because all I'm seeing here is words.
Well, there's no. So here, let me send you something in chat. It's as I was preparing the agenda, I discovered that there is a bug
Okay.
that
But
but
let's review what Sandra on our live stream is asking. Could this be implemented as a data structure? Quite possibly, yes.
well, again, if we're talking about the front end, then the answer to all of these questions is no, because what the front end needs is something completely inert. Data structure is not inert. It's part, an array is not inert.
The
What do you mean?
analog is up to. As far
Yeah,
as front
right.
end is concerned, the front end needs a cyclic that operates in exactly the same sorts of ways that up2 does.
Okay, so that's a completely different design from what we're now talking about. I mean, that's a completely different design where we could say things like ABC, cyclic.
No,
You know.
no. Still, you are misunderstanding.
It would be cyclic of that list. And
Okay.
then we do
Here, look,
subvalues.
look in the chat. And you're, I guess, not running in 14.2. So
I am.
14. You said 14.2. You meant 14.3.
oh, sorry.
I asked you at the beginning, do I need to be running in a prototype
You
or other
asked if you
build?
needed you asked if you needed the prototype build, and I
All
said
right.
no.
I'm sorry. I'm not as modern as you are. I tend to run the released builds. I don't. Okay, let's be more modern here. I mean, we just released 14.2 like 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, well, that's clearly useful.
Right. And right. The point is, that cyclic is just a representation. It's not actually a cyclic list. It's a representation of a cyclic list.
Okay,
If you
but we could.
if you do the first of that, you get the
I know,
list.
I know. I understand. But you could have subvalues here.
Yes,
achieve something.
that was my starting point, Stephen. If you were
Okay,
paying
all right.
attention.
Obviously, I was not. My apologies. Okay.
I mean,
So
we haven't implemented them, but yes, if we want if we want to add indexing to this thing, then the way to do that is via subvalues.
I agree. We're in total agreement.
Okay.
Okay. And we can as well have, we can have negative ones. We can have all those things.
Sure. And yes, and if we want, and since these are subvalues rather than parts, if we want 0 to mean,
Mhm.
The rightmost guy, then
I think we should do that. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh no, I'm gonna be horribly confused if 0 is not ahead.
There's no way it's going to be
No.
ahead. This has nothing to do with part specifications.
Right.
How
Think
do
of
I
it-
know? How do I know that if it's just an arbitrary expression?
It's a subvalue. It's not a part index.
But the cyclic of the list is representing an infinitely long list.
It's not. It's representing an infinitely long cyclic thing.
Exactly, and so the head is either cyclic or list. It's
No,
You've
the
been
minus one.
infected.
Sorry, Jeremy, but the -1 part is based on a finite length of the list. So there cannot be a -1 part if you calculate it the way we calculate part -1 and part 0. So I think Stephen is right here.
I agree.
Okay, but look,
Mhm.
Right.
look,
This is a sequence. If don't think of right. This is a sequence. It's not a yes. It's not a part number. It's a index in a sequence.
Yeah, but you understand that I'm worried about if I've got arbitrary code that's just looking at arbitrary. If I've got code that's looking at arbitrary code and trying to understand it based on extracting things.
But you would use part. You would never use
yeah, you would use
subvalues
part,
to
and then you
extract
get exactly
arbitrary.
what you would
Oh,
expect.
I missed that was function application, not part specification.
Okay,
Sorry
good.
about that.
Okay,
Subvalue.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking there could be a second argument here, which was some kind of limiter that might or might not be useful.
No.
Well, actually, it would probably be a second argument of the cyclic. But this seems like a good object. What else do we have to discuss about it? I mean, I think this is good.
Right.
Well, to
Then
me, it seems like the cyclic by itself with the subvalue is as good and perhaps more useful than the cyclic array thing.
Well, it is. So let's just drop the cyclic array. This is good.
Perfect.
okay.
This is good, and maybe this is what we already concluded last time. So I kind of went off in some silly direction here. Oh, I guess this doesn't work because that is actually a piece of grid here. Okay, should we go on to the next topic?
Sure.
Function settings.
Right. So we had a discussion, and you were wanting about well, we had a discussion about sort of all sorts of things, and you were wanting resource objects for a bunch of documentation things, which I think is kind of silly, actually. And there are
we want a place to hang additional information associated with the function.
Right. And there so there are, at least 2, possibly 3 sort of use cases, which I've sort of delineated here. And each have sort of a somewhat different feel to them, right? So we have like getting the string arguments, which is the thing you wanted resource data for. And we could, we already have this information in the front end. Now, John has figured out a way to get that information to the kernel. It's not in the build yet, so we can't actually show that. But we're not gonna have people write front end execute of blah blah blah, right? We want to put this in some sensible place. And
so you're saying that things which are basically kernel implementation things happen to have found their way by way of essentially some documentation analog into the front end, and now we're going to snarf them back from the front end, so to speak.
Well, they're string completions, right? It's for the completion, the code completion stuff.
Well, it might be code completions, it might be many
note.
different things. It might be method names, it might be all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Sure.
But you're saying the stuff happens to be available in the front end, so why not use it from there?
Sure. I mean we could, if there are more classes of information than things that are in the front end, then we can devise other ways of curating those. But that's a large body of curation work we've already done, so let's use it.
Yeah, right. Fair enough.
And then right. And I think sort of all the examples you've complained about, like the musical instruments, are already there, right? So
already in the front end.
Yes.
Okay, but we still have to name the list of musical instruments to know what we are selecting, so to speak.
Name the musical.
I mean, maybe, unless it's some piece of information tied to sound note, which is where you're going to be using it.
Obviously,
right?
It's a piece of information tied to sound note, but what there might be the methods for sound note as well as the instrument names. See what I'm saying?
But
every object that we're dealing with here will have a certain number of keyed constructs. Like the instrument list is one keyed construct. Method values, if sound note had method values, would be another keyed construct. See what I'm saying?
Yes, possibly.
But there's no way we can get away without that. That they're going to be functions.
Wait. All right. So I wasn't necessarily thinking of method options, but that's maybe
what we discussed before. Settings for method options.
But the in terms of musical instruments, I mean, all right, maybe it wouldn't be keyed into sound note musical instruments, but it could be keyed into sound note first argument and sound note second argument. Right, that's certainly how it's stored in the front end.
I know. I'm not a fan of that. I think it's bad. I also am concerned that there are many of these lists that are shared between functions.
Sure.
And so it's going to get awkward if it's always keyed to a function name.
why would it not be associated with, all of those individual function names, right?
It
If
might
we-
be.
It certainly will be in the front end.
Okay.
Something like language, there's a common language set, but there lots of functions have only subsets of languages they operate on, or writing scripts,
I
etc.
see.
Yeah, and there are some cases where, the front end draws on the same completion list for multiple functions. Not a huge number, but they exist.
And also, I think the use cases we have for something like that is gonna be function centric anyways. Like the user is not gonna think about the method option and what settings it has in general, but a specific function, and if it has a method, what setting it takes.
Right. Okay, so what are our proposed possible designs?
All right, so for this, for this set of information, this could maybe go in syntax information or just be additional information in information, and then if we, and
I
then
really
we could,
don't like that, but okay, go on.
right, and I suppose the advantage of putting it in information is if we want to rename some of these things, we can do that in information.
But
Why don't you like
information
sticking-
is
but why don't
usually
you like
applied
sticking in
to an
information?
object. Wait a minute. Information is usually applied to an object. Well, I guess to a symbol.
Excuse me, for the first however many how many years of its existence, information applied to symbols.
Yeah, okay, you're right.
and there's lots of useful information there.
So you would propose that we would say or something.
Well, I mean, it could appear in the one argument form, and yes, if we wanted to give additional names, I mean, I think that would take some thought beyond sort of,
Well,
completion.
so maybe it would be a thing, just like we have options and attributes and so on. We would have a thing called settings or something, or related values, or I don't know what we would call it.
Yeah, we could probably do like in the example of plot above, there's an opener for options because there's 65 of them. We don't want it scrolling off the page. So if there was another set of parameters that said, for sound node instruments or parameters.
I don't think that's quite what we want, because one of the things well, I mean, here, I don't know whether we have a click to copy here. We don't. Right? Because one of the things that we really need is how do you get it programmatically?
Which has nothing to do with click to copy.
Well, no, fair point. Fair point. I mean, how do we get, what is the name of that thing?
Well, I believe that's options, right?
Well,
So if
in
you
that
do
particular
plot-
case, it's options, right? But if we have something else that says instruments here, what do you type? How do you know what you type? Right?
No, sorry. Also, in this case, sound note, isn't that like the third argument? What you're looking for?
Yes. So what's your point?
That is not. It's not even an option.
We're
It's
not
a-
talking about options. We're using options as an example of something that is listed inside the information object.
okay, sorry. I got
I
confused.
think the analog you're looking for is information of plot of options, where options is string.
Yes.
No. I'm not sure if it works as a second argument.
It does.
Oh, wait,
Yeah,
oh,
it does. It
okay.
does.
Okay.
It does.
I mean, we had a similar discussion the other week about system information, right? Of wanting to be able to like click to copy on the label
Yes.
or on the value.
Yes, which we clearly need.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense. to
And
have
I
a
was about to
similar-
ask me, what's the relationship with system information? Like this
System
is
information is about
also
the system. This is about functions.
Right. The modernized
sorry.
version of information was based largely on the structure of system information.
I misspelled because I was confused by you saying that. I was asking syntax information. I was thinking about, which is looks like a bit related in a sense because these are valid values for the third argument of
Well,
sound note.
syntax information is a shadowy creature. Is it even documented in the?
Yes. And it right. I mean, this could conceivably go into syntax information, but then it couldn't be called, there wouldn't be no renaming of it, right? It would be, completions for first argument, completions for second argument,
Yeah.
etc.
No, we really don't want that.
I don't understand what value there is in renaming these things. I mean, then you're back in the position of having to look up in the documentation, like, okay, so what is this thing called? At which point you may as well just look at the documentation,
Well,
right? If you're going to give a special name to each thing, then you can't get it programmatically.
okay, we got several degrees of freedom here. We've got the completion, we've got the autocomplete system, which could have something where, at the end of the autocomplete list, it has something which you can get to, which gives you the programmatic version of that. I think it will be acceptable to look in the documentation to find the programmatic thing. The thing that is completely unacceptable is to have to scrape the documentation to get the data, which is what you have to do right now. I think
shouldn't we do that anyway as a sanity check? I mean, let's say that as a developer, I maintain a list of options. Let's say that I also maintain a list of possible settings in a canonical form for the third argument of sound note.
Sure.
Should we have a sanity check? No, if the two lists do not match, either I should, remove something from. I mean, the front end is building. Something is building a list by scraping the documentation.
It's not. It's a human putting it in.
Okay.
Right,
No,
guys?
it's not. No.
Is it really?
Wait a minute. What is
No.
going on? How does the autocompleter get the list of sound note values?
It's in the case of sound note values, I don't remember 100% for certain. Typically, these things come from the documentation.
By scraping?
Yes.
Wait, don't we have a tag?
It's tagged in the documentation, and then there's a scraping process that looks for the tags. But there are some exceptional cases. Not every case is handled that way.
Things like units have their own build process where they build a list of units as part of the unit table build.
Right.
And I think that sound note is one of the exceptions, but I don't recall exactly how it's done though for sound note.
Yeah, I would assume it's because I don't think there's any tagging on the doc page. So it's
I just verified that there is no tagging.
Yeah. It's probably a tree in the code assist repo, which means it is manually
yeah, in the exceptions, there are some exceptions that are built by actually getting the thing to make a report on itself, and those things are always going to be up to date. And then there are some exceptions that are done by basically hard-coded manual lists, and that's where things can go wrong.
But if you forget a second about the exception, like if people took care of tagging their tables
I
in the documentation.
I don't think I think the exceptions are actually the important cases because those are the ones that typically need more manual updates. But
okay, fair point. I also think that many people do not know about the tagging. Like I myself discovered that very late, and I rediscovered that multiple times in my life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to kind of spread the word and make sure that every relevant person knows. And a lot of times these bugs end up just coming to me, and it's like less work for me to just fix the darn thing than it is to try to teach someone who I don't even know who it is.
Listen, guys, guys, I have to go fairly soon. So can we, I mean, okay, my gut feeling about this is it might be worthwhile to have some way to flow these things into syntax information, but I don't think it's the only solution. I think we need a way to expect to have sort of attached values alongside functions. Maybe that can be done in information, or maybe that's a settings information, which is what we talked about last time, as I recall.
Well, but I think that is a completely different use case.
So
Can we craft something internal like options of F that we start using? I mean, I was toying with this idea with Shadi. Like, I could do, settings or whatever of F, 1, F, 2, and put a list of values for one argument. And then it doesn't have to be the way we expose it to the user, but it's the information gathering process that we need to start doing at some point.
But something related to that concept that we should consider is that users might want to use this for their own functions.
Yeah, I mean, we document the hook at some point, we rename it into a system function with an alias. But the point is,
So what is it that you're wanting to create?
I mean, if I write a new function, it's on me as a developer saying, options. I mean, I could parse like arrows and rows myself, but I don't. I say options of F and I provide a list. So it's on me to keep that list up to date and to make sure that everything there is documented and whatnot. So, I mean, to me, this looks like very similar kind of function.
Wait, stop. All right. So
I was finishing the sentence. It's okay.
Except you'd already lost me, so there is no point in continuing the sentence. So you have, I mean, I don't understand because, right, if options of F equals blah is not up to date, your function doesn't work. So what is it that you want to add to that?
Except we all know there are sneaky ways that people do all the time to write options that somehow still work.
Yeah, I mean, our language is super flexible in a good way and in a super hackable way. So the point is, let's say it's on me as a developer to keep stuff up to date, and you could even have some automated error messages.
Which stuff are you wanting to keep up to date?
So I think
in this case,
Julio is suggesting something like internal backtick argument settings or value settings.
So here's a related concept that is super useful, but that
wait. Value settings is something completely different, right? You're talking about like possible values for the options.
Yes, or arguments.
Which is well, those are I'm going to say those are two completely different things.
Unsure.
And not just because we already have one set of information, but also because, options generally are automatically resolved to something. And so when you're talking about option settings, you might want to know what that's resolving to, which is different from, string arguments, which are generally pretty obvious.
By obvious, you mean like a finite set?
Well, no, it's a finite, well, A, it's a finite set, but B, it's also like, if it's a required argument, then you know what it is. If it's not a required argument, then either it has no effect or there's a documented default, right? It's not like, right, there's no equivalent of, image, plot style goes to automatic, which who the hell knows what that means, and it differs from depends on what notebook you happen to evaluate that in.
But also, Itai, I think clarification. I don't think we're talking about just the default settings. I think the value is going to be in knowing all the possible settings for argument 1 of F, method or option X of F.
Sure. But again, I would say, those are, again, I'm saying options and arguments are two different use cases. As evidenced by the fact that, the way we store the completion information for them is completely different.
I mean, fine. If you want two different systems, like I don't want us to fight on this. like my point is like, let's try to solve one point at a time. This thing of sound notes is actually storing it in the kernel alongside the function definition a sensible idea, or is it totally bogus?
Well, I mean, I think this is necessarily totally bogus because we have hidden arguments all the time.
So there is a related concept. You have the notion of an argument which takes a one of a fixed list of strings. There are other kinds of arguments for completion purposes, and that metadata is potentially interesting elsewhere too. For example, an argument that takes a file name, an argument that takes a directory. These are concepts that completion knows about and are potentially useful, in other kind of, programmatic usages.
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah.
And I think in cases, for instance, that an argument or option setting can be a function, I think conceptually knowing that that should be or could be a function, as well as maybe a few examples of such functions, are probably going to be very useful. And just a reminder, one of the reasons why this discussion is brought up again is for the purpose of training LLMs and making sure we have all the or as many possible use cases provided for that training.
Yeah, but I mean, right, we have inadequate documentation in some cases. Getting some programmatic look, okay, seems to me we should look at this. We should try and make a list of all the things that we might like to keep information on. Do not think about where we're going to put it yet. Right? So, for example, any table in documentation is clearly something we want to keep. Do we agree about that?
I'm not willing to commit to yes at this point.
Okay.
I cannot think about a case where a table information is unuseful. I think I'm a partial yes.
Okay. I mean, let's say image pad, for example, just as a random example in the shoddy domain.
Mhm.
I want to get something related to this. I understand that there are things like this, which it's not clear what you do with that, whether it's a blank color or something. I don't know what you do exactly, but getting some version of this, because I'd like to be able to, a typical use case for me would be all the named cases. I mean, maybe we should have a notion of named padding, where we just list the things with names. You get what I'm saying? Because a very common case for me is I just want to see all the variants.
But would
Well,
you
I-
also like to see a 0.5 in that list as
No,
well?
not
They are
really.
not
Not
named.
really. No, I want to see the named cases. That's what I want to see. That's a common case, is that I want to see the named ones, and then separately I might want to see the parameterized ones.
Isn't the named cases just floating the autocomplete information though? Assuming
Yeah,
that the
it is.
autocomplete information
It is, but
yeah.
I'm not thinking about it as autocomplete information. Okay, the fact that we happen to have it as autocomplete information is great for us. Okay, but the user is thinking about it as the named cases.
I would argue still
I
keeping everything in
I-
one place and then selecting based on the values being strings to get the named cases
So
out
that's
of the
fine.
bigger
That's fine.
list.
I'm not talking about implementation. I'm
Sure.
talking about what the user sees. The
Sure.
user says, I want to make a list of all the named cases. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
I don't, well, I just disagree with you that that's how the user thinks of it. I think the user thinks of it as what are the possible things I can type in here, so it's autocomplete information. But
No, I mean, look, as a user, as a sample user, I know that this is a
I'm
thing.
not a sample user.
You are too,
Okay.
but we are two different sample users. Okay. And I'll tell you that in many things I've wanted to do, I just, okay, so this case, I don't know why those options are strings. It seems totally weird.
Because this was designed at the point where you had decreed that we should not be creating symbols for option names and we should be using strings.
I don't think that's right. I think it's when we should have been using associations for these, but anyway, never mind.
Right, this is what, a V6 era function, right? There were no associations.
What the hell
7.
happened here? What happened there?
That's a bug. It's reported.
Oh, I'm running.
This
in
is 14.3. Yeah.
14.3. Well, you're off by one version, Itai.
Yes.
But it still predates associations.
Yeah, all right, fair enough. The thing I was looking for was speech synthesize. Where is it?
By the way, it turns out that ImagePad is another exception. I think the reason it's an exception is because its table is a bit unusually structured.
What exception to what?
It's not scraped from the documentation.
The table is an illustrated table. I think we have annotated tables like that in the past. If, yeah, I can look into that. We can work on that.
Yeah, there are a couple of different difficulties with this table. I'm not sure which one of them scorched it,
Okay,
but
it doesn't matter what the implementation is. We're still working on the. Okay, so here, for example, I'd clearly like to be able to map over the possible method settings here. Right, that's clearly a useful thing to be able to do.
I agree. That's definitely that second use case that Itai has in the notebook. Default settings, but in addition to that, all the possible settings for options.
Perhaps Wolfram language data could contain these tables in a useful way?
Possibly. But I mean, this is a weird function that shouldn't exist, I think. Well, I mean, I don't even know. This search thing here is weird. This thing is very weird. But notice, as we try to design this, that some of the search capabilities for voice style data might be useful in whatever function settings or information, whatever thing we have, right? But we could,
like that table. Would that table be that first table? Would that be a useful thing?
Not really. No,
exactly.
not really.
So,
all right. So I agree. Not every table is useful. Did I claim every table was useful? Maybe I did.
Yes, you did.
Okay, then I'm wrong. Okay. But, that table is probably useful.
Yes.
Probably. But what I'm more interested in is the settings for that. I'd like to be able to see right here in this documentation, what are the settings for that? See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, gets a little detaily, but that language is a slot argument to or a possible argument to a function that voice style data can get.
Okay, all right. Voice style data is a weird function to begin with, but I mean,
But I understand what you're saying, that the right-hand sides of stuff you're interested in.
Yes. I mean, I want to be able to make, a sample of every voice here. I want to be able to easily just map over sound synthesize of the number 3 spoken in every possible voice. And there's no easy way to do that right now.
Yeah,
I don't think there wouldn't be an easy way to do it even if you had this information, right? You'd need to sort of construct some outer product and probably some
I don't think so. You just need the name, Itai, in this case. The name is a unique identifier. Fiona, there's only one Fiona. There's not a British Fiona and an Irish Fiona. See what I'm saying?
Oh, I see.
Also, I want to remark, these can only be computed at runtime. This is not information that we can put statically in the documentation or anywhere, because it depends on the user's machine and the user setting at that time.
That's another wrinkle. That's interesting.
Which is why
that might happen. Yeah, right. But that may happen in other cases as well. And if we have this be a function as opposed to pretending it's syntax information, for example, well, even in syntax information, we might want to pull in that real-time thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we'll need hooks for various things, like in
right.
units or in dates or things like that.
I mean, the thing about syntax information, right? It's really a way for the kernel to communicate information to the front end, right? the kernel makes a syntax information declaration, and then the front end uses that for coloring of various sorts. And so it's a little weird to be sort of adding all of this stuff to syntax information. But you know, maybe we do, well, I know maybe we do need sort of one sort of super function, although I still think, you know, sort of being able to programmatically, you know, easily and programmatically get like, you know, I want to know what are all the possible second arguments here without having to learn some super complicated function, because what you're describing is, I think, is some pretty complicated function if it's going to give us like all possible settings for all thing.
I know, that's why I think it should be, we should have hooks to it in the documentation. We should have hooks in autocompletes and in the documentation, because those are the realistic places people are going to find this.
Okay.
I don't think it's not easy to discover. Just like having some weird, you know, drilled down setting in system information should have a click to copy, you know, name. Okay. I really should go. I'm still recovering from being sick here, and I seem to have multiple live streams all stacked on top of each other.
All right, I'll let me just throw out one more question that I put in the agenda there, which is right. So last time we talked about a thing that would get like the default settings. So you could say like plot, you know, I know plot style, right? And it would give you whatever the colors are or whatever. Is this something we would want to be style sheet aware? So if you evaluate it in a notebook with a style sheet, which changes how plot defaults to, it would give you the colors for that particular
I
notebook?
think so. I absolutely think so, but I don't know. I mean,
Right.
just like, you know,
so that's another type of dynamicism in this function. In addition to, it depends on the user's machine, which is, you know, again, why I think of function settings as different from completion information, because, right, either it's a valid argument or it's not, right? and maybe that's just me, but right,
I just don't think that completions is I mean, this is for programmatic use, and I think it's going to confuse people if you tell them it has to do with completions. Because completions have their own Wild West, heuristic character. And I don't think we want to be locking down.
I'm not saying we necessarily call it completions, but if we call it, you know, valid string arguments for position 2 in this function, I mean, I think that's a very
that's a reasonably well-defined thing.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
All right. Well, I think what's clear is that I did not understand what Shadi and Julio were suggesting, and so I think I should have a meeting with a smaller group of people first to try to come to some consensus before we bring this back to this larger meeting.
Sounds good. And I think the more use cases you can find for cases where we just like to have information associated with a function, that will be really good. I think there'll be a list of like 30 of these things that are types of things that we want to have information on.
There's that third one, just to spice it up a little. Things like what net models, what data packlets. A function.
Yeah, like for net model, what are the possible net models?
Well,
what are the possible?
Shadi is saying something else. Suppose, you know,
right, image identify.
Or
which net models image identify rely on, which models speech synthesize rely on, or whatever else.
And why does one care?
If you want to preload all the ones so that, you know, you don't have to wait
well, that's a reasonable thing.
A 2 gigabyte download at your critical point.
Yes.
EPC, for instance, was a good use case of that information.
Yes. Well, I mean, yes, that's another use case. Okay, that's part of the 30. Maybe it got to 35 now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. See you all soon. Sorry,
Okay.
I gotta run. Okay,
Yeah.
bye.